I still remember that morning as if it were yesterday. The silence in our home was heavier than words could ever describe. I sat by the window watching the rain slide down the glass, each drop echoing the tears I refused to let fall. He used to love mornings like this. Coffee brewing, laughter in the kitchen, a gentle kiss on my forehead before work. But that day he didn't even look at me. His eyes had already learned to love someone else. She was our maid, quiet, humble, and always pretending to respect me. I never imagined she'd be the reason my world would collapse. When I caught them together, time froze. My voice trembled as I asked, "How long has this been happening?" He didn't answer, just looked away, ashamed but not enough to stop. That silence broke me more than words ever could. Days later, the papers were on the table. Divorce. My name, his name, and an ending I never saw coming. He said he'd found real happiness, as if I'd never given him any. I signed those papers with shaking hands, and as my pen lifted, I felt something inside me die. Neighbors whispered, friends pitied me. But no one truly knew how it felt to be replaced by someone who once cleaned my floors. I watched him leave with her, smiling, holding hands, walking into a future built on betrayal. What he didn't know was that life watches quietly. It doesn't forget. Every tear we shed, every pain we endure, it all returns one day, in ways we can't imagine. And for him, that day was closer than he thought. After he left, the house became painfully quiet. Every corner held a memory of him. The chair he used to sit on, the cup he always left half full, even the scent of his perfume lingered like a ghost refusing to leave. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our years together, asking myself where I went wrong. I had given him everything: love, loyalty, and a home built from sacrifice. But apparently none of that was enough to keep him. People said I should move on, that time would heal me. But how do you heal from being replaced by someone who once bowed to you with respect? I wasn't angry at her at first. I pitied her. I thought maybe she truly loved him. But that illusion didn't last long. Within weeks of their marriage, the truth started to surface. Whispers of her greed, her arrogance, her sudden obsession with his money and property. I tried to warn him, not out of love anymore, but because I didn't want to see him fall apart completely. I sent a message, simple and honest. Not every smile hides love. Some hide hunger. He never replied. Meanwhile, I started rebuilding my life one piece at a time. I took a job at a local design firm, something I had always dreamed of but never dared to do while being a housewife. I began to feel alive again. The pain was still there, but it started to turn into strength. And as I slowly rose, he began to fall, though he didn't know it yet. Life was preparing him for a storm so cruel, even I wouldn't have wished it upon him. Rumors started spreading quietly at first, like wind before a storm. I heard from mutual friends that his new wife, our former maid, had started controlling everything. She handled his bank cards, managed his business calls, even decided who he could meet. He who once ruled every conversation was now a shadow of himself, dancing to her tune. First, I didn't believe it. But soon photos surfaced on social media. Her dressed in luxury, showing off handbags and jewelry that I knew he could never have afforded before. He had always been careful with money, proud of his savings, proud of what we built together. Yet now he was spending it all on her smiles. I could almost hear her laughter when she realized how easy it was to blind him. The same woman who used to dust my furniture now wore designer clothes and drove the car I once washed for him. But karma doesn't announce its arrival. It creeps in silently. One morning he called one of his old friends asking for a loan. She had emptied their joint account overnight. Gone, every penny, every investment, even his personal savings. She vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a note. Thanks for everything. When I heard that, I didn't feel joy. I felt silence. Sometimes life doesn't need revenge. It writes its own justice. He tried searching for her. Police, private investigators, everything, but she had planned it all too well. He lost his home next, then his car, and slowly his dignity. The same people who once envied his perfect life now whispered about his downfall. And somewhere deep inside, I felt both sorrow and peace. Maybe this was the universe restoring balance, giving him the pain he once gifted me. Days turned into weeks, and the man I once knew began to vanish before the eyes of everyone who had once admired him. The confident husband, the man with a smile that could light up any room, was now reduced to a figure shuffling through life, confused and desperate. His pride had crumbled under the weight of betrayal and greed. Every friend he called avoided him. Every business contact laughed behind his back. And even the maid who once held his heart had disappeared with everything he owned. I didn't watch this unfold out of malice. I watched quietly, in the shadows of my own recovery. I had found small joys again, designing, laughing with colleagues, helping neighbors, building a life that didn't depend on anyone else. Yet, each time I heard of his misfortune, my chest tightened. Not because I wished him pain, but because I knew intimately how much it hurt to lose someone who had once been everything to you. He had walked away thinking love could be bought or taken, thinking loyalty was a currency he didn't owe me. And now he was learning the hard way that life doesn't bend to selfish desires. Hunger, emptiness, and despair were knocking at his door every single day. The world he had underestimated was now showing him its harshest truths. Even his pride couldn't save him from the relentless chain of consequences. The man who once commanded respect now begged quietly in corners, unnoticed, unseen, trying to find the smallest crumbs of dignity he had left. And yet, despite all of this, I never gloatingly celebrated. Life had given him the lesson. It was enough to watch. Months passed, and the man who had once controlled everything now barely controlled himself. He wandered streets he had never imagined entering, asking for help, food, or even a place to rest. People who once smiled at his arrival now turned away, unwilling to lend a hand. Every step he took was heavy with regret, every glance filled with shame. He had lost more than money. He had lost respect, dignity, and the very essence of who he thought he was. Meanwhile, I continued to rebuild my life, brick by brick, laughter by laughter. I was no longer the woman broken by betrayal. I had learned that strength grows quietly in the spaces left behind by loss. Friends returned to me not out of sympathy, but because they saw my resilience. I began investing in my own dreams, turning my pain into purpose. And each time I looked out my window and saw him in the distance begging, I felt an odd mixture of sorrow and vindication. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was the truth of life finally catching up with him. He had chosen greed over love, arrogance over loyalty, and the universe had delivered its quiet justice. I remembered every argument, every moment of betrayal, every smile he had shared with her while hiding lies from me. And yet I didn't curse him. I simply watched as karma unfolded, lesson by lesson. He became a cautionary tale in our town. People whispered about him in markets, cafes, and offices. He had it all, they said, but he lost it to a fleeting desire. And he knew it too. He could no longer hide from the emptiness that had replaced his life. No amount of pleading, no amount of searching, could bring back what he had thrown away. One evening I saw him from a distance, sitting on the curb, head in his hands, rain soaking through his clothes. The streets were empty, yet his despair felt loud enough to shake the world. I couldn't recognize the man I once loved. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by his own choices. The arrogance, the confidence, the charm, all gone, replaced by desperation and regret. People walked past him without a second glance. He reached out asking for coins, for a meal, even for a kind word, and yet no one stopped. He had learned that respect cannot be bought, and that people leave when the foundation of trust and love crumbles. He remembered the mornings when I would prepare his favorite breakfast, the nights when I waited for him, the silent sacrifices that built our life. And now he had nothing, no love, no home, no dignity. Meanwhile, I continued my life quietly. I had become stronger than I had ever imagined. Each day brought work, small joys, and a sense of accomplishment that he would never feel again. And though part of me still ached for what had been, I also knew that some people are only lessons in disguise. He was my lesson, and he would forever be a reminder of how fragile pride and selfishness are. I wondered if he ever thought of me, truly thought, not as a memory, but as someone who had loved him unconditionally. Perhaps he did, in those nights of hunger and cold. But by then it was too late. Life had moved forward, and he was left behind, haunted by every choice he had made. The irony was bitter. He had chased happiness, only to find himself abandoned by everyone, even the one who had always been there. Winter came, and with it, the harsh reality of his new life. Cold winds cut through his thin clothes, and every night he shivered under a threadbare blanket on a park bench. He had no home, no shelter, no warmth, only the haunting memories of what he had lost. The maid who once promised him love had vanished with everything he owned. He was alone, truly alone for the first time in his life. He wandered streets he once thought beneath him, begging for scraps of food, asking strangers for kindness, and learning what it truly felt like to be invisible. He who had walked into our home with pride, commanding attention, now begged for acknowledgement. Every coin in his palm felt heavy, every glance of pity a dagger reminding him of the arrogance he had carried. Meanwhile, I found peace in my own world. I had friends who valued me for who I was, not what I owned. I worked tirelessly on my projects, smiled freely, and felt a freedom he could never comprehend. I didn't celebrate his downfall, but a quiet satisfaction came from knowing that life's scales had finally balanced themselves. I often thought about confronting him, speaking the words I had withheld, telling him exactly what I felt when he left. But I knew it wasn't necessary. Karma had already spoken. His days were now filled with regret, hunger, and the realization that happiness cannot be stolen. It must be earned. And in that suffering he would finally understand the love he had abandoned, the loyalty he had betrayed, and the emptiness that cannot be filled by money, manipulation, or deceit. By spring, his life had become a monotonous struggle. Every day was a battle to survive, every night a reminder of the choices he had made. He would sit near the market, watching families laugh, couples hold hands, and children play, things he had taken for granted in our home. The world moved around him, but he was frozen, trapped in the consequences of his own greed. He had lost not just material wealth, but the warmth of human connection. He begged, he pleaded, he even tried to call old friends, but everyone had learned to avoid him. His pride, once unshakable, was now shattered completely. He had underestimated the simple truth that love cannot be replaced, that loyalty is priceless, and that selfishness has a cost far greater than he imagined. Meanwhile, I continued to thrive. My business flourished, and my life was filled with laughter and meaningful work. I had rebuilt myself stronger than ever, proving to the world, and to him, that happiness cannot be taken away by betrayal. Friends admired my strength, and I finally understood that the life he had abandoned was mine to reclaim. And yet, sometimes I would catch glimpses of him from a distance, disheveled and broken, a shadow of the man I once knew. It was not satisfaction that I felt, nor pity. It was a quiet reminder of the harsh lessons life teaches those who betray trust. He had chosen a path paved with lies and greed, and now he was walking it alone, stumbling with every step. One afternoon, I heard whispers that he had been spotted outside a cafe, shivering and muttering to himself. He had approached strangers asking for change, and even tried to sell small trinkets he found on the streets. His hands, once polished and steady, were now rough and cracked from begging, his clothes tattered and wet from the rain. He had become invisible in the eyes of the world, a man who had once commanded attention now fading into nothingness. I remembered the nights when he would complain about minor inconveniences, how I had comforted him, and how he had dismissed my love as ordinary. And now the world was dismissing him as ordinary, stripping him of everything he had once taken for granted. Every rejection, every cold shoulder, every ignored plea was a silent echo of the life he had destroyed, not just mine but his own. I did not wish to confront him, nor did I need to. Life had become his teacher, and it was punishing him in the harshest way possible. I had moved on, grown stronger, and found joy in my independence. But there was a strange pull in my chest every time I heard of him. An acknowledgement of how cruel life can be when someone disregards love and loyalty. Even the maid, the woman who had stolen his wealth and promised him happiness, remained unseen. Rumors suggested she had left the country, leaving him with nothing. He was alone, stripped of pride, wealth, and love. And in that emptiness, he began to understand the weight of every choice he had made, and the irreversible consequences of betrayal. Winter returned, harsher than before, and with it, the full weight of his solitude. Nights were spent huddled under a thin blanket on cold pavements, hands trembling not just from the cold, but from the gnawing hunger that never left him. He had no friends to call, no family to turn to, and no love to warm his nights. The streets he once walked past with arrogance now mocked him silently, every corner reminding him of the life he had thrown away. I had heard stories from people who saw him wandering aimlessly, begging for food, muttering to himself, sometimes breaking down in public. He had become a shadow, a warning whispered among locals. This is what happens to those who betray trust. His dignity, once so firmly held, was gone, replaced by shame and desperation. Every day was a lesson in humility he never wanted to learn. Meanwhile, I continued to build a life of purpose and freedom. My mornings were filled with work I loved, my evenings with laughter and company that truly valued me. I had turned my pain into strength, proving that happiness could not be stolen, only nurtured. And though I sometimes thought of him, it was no longer with grief. It was with a quiet understanding that life has its own justice. Even in his darkest moments, he seemed unaware of the lessons slowly imprinting themselves onto his soul. He had chased a fleeting desire, believed lies of love wrapped in greed, and now faced the consequences. Every shiver, every pang of hunger, every glance of pity from strangers was a mirror reflecting the choices he had made. And in that reflection, he was forced to confront the reality he had ignored for so long. Spring brought no relief for him. The streets had grown busier, the people sharper, and yet he remained invisible, begging for survival. He had lost the ability to demand attention, to command respect, or even to ask without shame. His pride, once unshakable, was shattered beyond repair. He wandered marketplaces, crowded stations, and alleys, desperately seeking any hand that might offer help, yet each attempt ended in rejection. I often thought back to the mornings when he would wake up beside me, complaining about trivial things while I quietly prepared our breakfast. Those tiny grievances had seemed so important to him, yet now they had vanished into insignificance. The life he had abandoned, the love, the home, the trust, had grown into something stronger in my absence. I had rebuilt myself brick by brick with patience, courage, and hope. He was no longer the man who had once walked past me with pride. He was a shadow, a ghost of arrogance fading into nothing. And as I heard of him from whispers in the neighborhood, I felt a mixture of sorrow and vindication. Sorrow because someone's life could fall so completely. Vindication because the universe had a way of teaching its lessons more painfully than any human could. Even the maid, who had stolen his fortune and vanished, was a reminder of the temporary nature of ill-gotten gain. He had learned that love cannot be forced, trust cannot be bought, and happiness cannot be stolen. Every empty day, every cold night, every unanswered plea was a lesson etched deep into his soul. A lesson that could never be undone, no matter how desperately he wished it could. By summer, he had become almost unrecognizable. The man who once commanded attention, who carried himself with pride and confidence, was now a figure huddled in corners, begging for scraps, ignored by the very world that had once admired him. His clothes were worn and torn, his hair unkempt, his hands scarred from the harshness of survival. Every day was a repetition of humiliation, every night a reminder of what he had lost. I, on the other hand, had found a rhythm in life that brought me peace. I was no longer the woman broken by betrayal. I was someone who had turned pain into strength. My home was filled with laughter, my work brought satisfaction, and my heart had begun to heal from the wound he had left. Every achievement reminded me of my resilience. Every smile a symbol that life continues, even after heartbreak. He had become a cautionary tale, whispered about in markets and streets. Remember him? People would say. He had it all, but he lost it because of greed and betrayal. And he knew deep down that those whispers were true. No amount of begging, no amount of pleading, could bring back the life he had abandoned. Every moment of comfort he once enjoyed was now replaced with cold reality. Even when he passed by people who recognized him, he lowered his head, ashamed and defeated. The arrogance he once carried had been replaced by desperation, the confidence by regret, and the smiles by hunger. And as he shuffled down the streets, the silent lesson was clear. Life punishes those who take love for granted and rewards those who endure with patience and dignity. Autumn arrived, painting the city in shades of gold and brown, but it brought no warmth for him. He sat by the fountain in the park, shivering, watching families stroll by, children laugh, couples hold hands, everything he had abandoned in pursuit of selfish desires. The world carried on, oblivious to his suffering, while he remained trapped in a cage of his own making. Every step he took was weighed down by regret. Every glance he stole filled with longing for the life he had lost. I had long since moved past the shadow he cast over my heart. My life was full, vibrant, and independent. Friends who had left during my grief returned, drawn to the strength and grace I had cultivated. I smiled freely, worked tirelessly, and embraced every opportunity with the courage he had never valued. Each day I grew stronger, wiser, and more certain that happiness comes not from possessions or manipulation, but from patience, integrity, and self-respect. Yet I couldn't completely ignore him. From time to time, news of his plight reached me. Him begging on street corners, sleeping in doorways, searching desperately for help that never came. It was not joy I felt, nor pity. It was the sober recognition of life's justice. He had chosen greed over love, deceit over loyalty, and the consequences had followed him like shadows he could not escape. And so he wandered, diminished and humbled, while I flourished. The irony was clear. The very man who had thought he could buy happiness now discovered that some things, like trust and love, can never be stolen, only earned, and once lost they cannot be reclaimed. Life had spoken, and it had spoken loudly. By winter's return, he had become almost unrecognizable to anyone who had once known him. His face was lined with suffering, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights and endless hunger. Every corner he turned seemed to mock him, every passerby reminded him of the life he had thrown away. He had begged for coins, for food, for shelter. But the world had no mercy for those who squandered trust and love. I had moved into a life I had once only dreamed of, filled with purpose, laughter, and meaningful connections. My home was warm, my work fulfilling, and my heart unburdened by the betrayal that had once seemed insurmountable. Each day reminded me that happiness is not given. It is built from patience, resilience, and self-respect. And while he wandered the streets, I thrived in the life he had forsaken. Whispers about him spread quietly among neighbors and friends. They spoke of the man who once had everything and now had nothing. They spoke of greed, betrayal, and the harsh consequences of taking love for granted. And somewhere deep inside, I knew he was listening, painfully aware that every choice he had made had led him to this empty existence. Even if he had wanted to return, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, it was too late. I had grown beyond him, beyond the pain he caused, and beyond the need to dwell on a past that had already taught him the hardest lessons. He had chased what he thought was happiness, only to find that life rewards patience and punishes betrayal. And in that punishment, he would finally understand the value of what he had lost. The day finally came when he returned, not with pride, not with confidence, but with shame etched into every line of his face. He came to me hesitant, broken, asking for forgiveness, for a second chance, for even the smallest fragment of the life he had destroyed. His voice trembled, his eyes pleaded, but I saw through him. The man who had once walked away without a thought for my heart was gone. What stood before me was merely a shadow, a lesson learned too late. I listened quietly, feeling the weight of years he had taken from me. The nights I had spent crying silently, the moments of betrayal that had cut deeper than any blade. He begged, not just for love, but for mercy, for something to fill the void he had created with his choices. Yet, forgiveness cannot erase the lessons life has already taught. Some wounds, once opened and left to fester, cannot be healed by empty words or hollow apologies. I shook my head slowly, a mixture of sorrow and quiet strength flowing through me. You made your choice, I said, and now you live with it. I have nothing left to give you, not my time, not my trust, not my heart. Life is teaching you the only way it can, through your own suffering. He stood there, silent, defeated, his ego shattered, finally facing the emptiness he had once ignored. And as he walked away, alone and humbled, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I had survived betrayal, rebuilt my life, and found joy that no one could steal. Karma had done its work and I was free. The man who had thought he could take happiness from me had learned the hardest lesson of all. Some things once lost can never be reclaimed. The streets would remember him. I would remember the strength I had found. And life, as always, moved forward, rewarding those who endure and teaching those who falter. As you watch his story unfold, remember that life always teaches its lessons. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life tales that touch the heart. Comment below your thoughts. Have you ever faced betrayal or witnessed karma in action? Your story matters.